Early warning satellites detected multiple Russian launches.
What? Meow, it's Huples cat and little Wolfie. In this video, we're going to look at what happens to the civilian population of the West if Russia detonates a nuclear weapon in the Ukraine. This is what happens if Russia drops a 45 kiloton weapon as an airburst over the city of Kherson. This is what happens if Russia detonates a ground burst bomb of 45 kilotons over the city of Kherson. Bear in mind, that's extremely small tonnage in terms of modern weaponry. Or if they go mad, say they drop an 800 kiloton weapon over the city of Kiev. Or if they take the same SS-25 Topolov missile and drop it on the ground in the centre of Kiev. This is what happens. Now I am assuming here that Russia, if they choose to do this, will do it with the winds in their favour, and the wind will actually blow the air that's full of radiation and dead Ukrainians into Europe, not into Russia or Belarus.
Russia has warned that if Ukraine should join the NATO alliance, conflict will definitely escalate into World War III. Moscow's Security Council says that the bloc should understand that letting Kyiv in is suicidal. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced an accelerated bid to join NATO last month. All 30 members must give their consent. Under NATO's Article 5, an attack on one member is an attack on the entire bloc.
How likely is all of this to happen? I hope extremely unlikely, but there's a definite possibility this could get out of hand and we could be faced with possible annihilation of ourselves as a species. The only time Article 5 was ever triggered in the history of NATO so far was after 9/11. It is, if you will, a red line in the sand. If any of the 13 member states of NATO suffer a military attack, all 13 states are automatically at war with the attacker, for whatever reason they attacked. But what would the governments of the West do if a tactical weapon is deployed by Russia in the Ukraine? They are doing prudent planning to do this, though the details have been hidden and we don't quite know what they are. In this video I'm going to theorise a lot. Theorise is a nice word for guessing what our governments would do for the population, for the civilian population, what restrictions, what freedoms, what protections they would put in place, what it would be like in the first 24 to 48 hours after a detonation of a tactical nuclear weapon by Russia in the Ukraine. Now, how each individual government prevents panic buying and prevents fleeing out of the cities by its population will be different. What is true, the hope is that there will be no nuclear exchange at all, and that if there is nuclear exchange, we will wag our fingers very sternly at Putin. But will we actually attack Russia with nuclear weapons? That's a question that I'm not going to get into, because I don't know, and nobody online knows at all. It's just really guessing. The reason I feel empowered to guess in this video about what happens to the population, the civilian population, is because we went through World War I and World War II.
These negotiations have been ongoing, but what can we expect from the latest round of talks about Ukraine potentially joining NATO?
Well, I think a degree of scepticism, certainly from ministers in this building, NATO headquarters, when it comes to those new Russian threats about Ukraine's aspirations for NATO membership. You'll recall that Moscow used that really as justification also for its invasion. It said that Ukraine joining NATO would be something that it's a red line for Russia. Now, while NATO insists and does have, it says, an open door policy, that means Ukraine has the right to apply to join NATO. Well, most analysts would say that Ukraine was, even before this full-scale invasion happened, really quite far off from full eligibility for
Well, we seem to have lost Rosie there.
Attack warning red. Attack warning red. Seek immediate shelter. Seek immediate shelter. Attack warning red. Attack warning red.
Well, that woke you all up. Okay, enough of the fear porn. Let's have a little look at what the British government did in September 1939 to prepare its population to be able to thrive and survive ongoing, large-scale aerial bombardment. Well, they started preparing in early 1938 in earnest. They spent quite a bit of time getting people to plant their own vegetables on any bit of spare land they had. Allotments were started throughout Great Britain so they could actually feed themselves if there was a problem. They also recruited and trained people to be air raid wardens and home guard. In general, the government spent a lot of effort and money trying to encourage people to think about their own personal safety. They spent a lot of time telling people what to do if it happened, if there was an air raid or a gas attack. They spent a lot of time telling people how to actually stretch the rations further if they had to ration and how to stay healthy. Now obviously if we have a war in 2022, we haven't spent the last year telling people what to do. So if your city or town is going to get bombed or have a missile strike, you want to get the civilian population out of there. Now there's an argument. The slide says 1 million. Other sources say almost 3 million people were evacuated over a 4-day period. Evacuating 1 million, mainly young children, in a 4-day period is pretty impressive. What is true, and this is something you might want to take on board if you're in education, is around about 100,000 teachers were also evacuated with those children to look after and teach those children. And a large amount of that wasn't voluntary. Doing such a large-scale evacuation is impossible to do without risk, and mistakes were made. And I'm sure you can think of the possibilities of things that could go wrong in this type of a scenario. Whether it was 1 million or 3 million, London at this time had a population of 8.9 million. So this is pretty much all of the children of the major cities. Now they were expecting 300,000 casualties that would require hospitalisation within the first 10 days of the war. They actually expected to have 25,000 casualties a day, day after day. And that never actually happened, thank goodness. What did happen is over the 6 years of war, is about 67,000 civilians died. Interestingly, they were the first population to actually experience missile strikes. At the end of the war in 1943 to 44, especially in 45, Germany used the V1 and the V2 missiles to actually hit London, and they actually hit very successfully. Now if you look at my most generous, relaxed forecast for a nuclear strike of a tactical weapon in the Ukraine, you will notice that over a few weeks, Ukraine will lose the equivalency of about half the number of British civilians that died in 6 years of World War II. Let that sink in for a minute. But would there be a huge voluntary evacuation? Panic scrambling to get out of the cities? Well, it actually depends on what time of day it happens and what goes on and how people are feeling. What was true was during the darkest days of C-19, nobody actually really evacuated. I think if people have places to go, like they have cottages or family and friends in rural areas, a percentage of them would voluntarily evacuate. I think the vast majority would keep going to work, would panic, but would stay in place. I'm pretty convinced the government's going to tell them to stay in place, and in fact might make it impossible for them not to do so. But if I was you, I'd split, and I'd split early. For sure, our government and our officials will be splitting early out of target zones, and they'll be getting out of there as fast as they possibly can. And so should you if you can. So to recap, there will be no organised evacuation of the major cities of the West. Frankly, we can't do it in the time available. We could have done it with planning. We haven't planned for it. So that's going to put you in a kind of a strange position. A tactical nuke goes off in Ukraine. Do you evacuate your children? I would, because I think it's worth doing it. If you have somewhere safe for them to go, send them. Don't wait to be told to send them. Don't wait for tactical nuclear weaponry to become strategic. Move them. And yourself if you can. For the vast majority of us, that won't be possible. You'll have work to go to. The government are going to put in a lot of propaganda about running away and not doing it. And if things get really bad, as we'll talk about next time, you might not actually physically safely be able to leave the city. If the press informs you that the government is evacuating, if the press informs you that diplomatic people are pulling out, at that point you might want to think about pulling out yourself. There'll be a lot of misinformation. People will spend a lot of time online looking for information, and there won't be much. What there will be quite quickly is horrific pictures of mass destruction. Remember what we're talking about here. Best case is 6 times the death toll that's already happened in Ukraine happening over a week. Children and women and men with skin blistering off them, large quantities of them will be all over the TV screens. It will be absolutely horrific, and it will be a compulsive thing to watch. Try not to. If that happens, you need to crank up your war plan. You want to get all the food and water you can stored up as fast as you can, preferably in a location that's nowhere near a target zone. 2022 is not 1939. Things will happen much more dramatically and fast than ever happened before in human history. I would argue that part of why we're in the situation we're in is because our brains haven't caught up with our technology. I'm not saying Russia's going to explode a tactical nuke. I hope they don't. I don't see why they would. But if they do, you better mentally be prepared for it. And that's the point of this series of videos. Well, thanks for watching. Take care, and next on...
The first day of gas rationing in California forced 10 million motorists to line up for hours on end as they tried to fill up their tanks on the allotted day.
They rationed all basic foods except bread and vegetables.
In the meanwhile, I'd like to, again, caution our audience against over-concern.
This video has been brought to you by Attack Warning Red Terrier 2022.